lipid bilayer is not miscible with either the extracellular fluid or the intracellular fluid. Therefore, it constitutes a barrier for the movement of most water molecules and water-soluble substances between the extracellular and the intracellular fluid compartments. On the other hand, protein molecules constitute an alternate pathway through the cell membranes. The pathways by which substances cross the membranes include passive diffusion, facilitated diffusion, primary active transport, and secondary active transport. Passive diffusion is the net movement of material from an area of high concentration to an area of lower concentration. The difference of concentration between the two areas is known as the concentration gradient. Diffusion will continue until this gradient has been eliminated. This pathway does not require ATP. Substances move through the plasma membrane without the necessity of binding with carrier proteins in the membrane. It can occur through the cell membrane by two pathways. The first is through the interstices of the lipid bilayer. This pathway is taken by substances that are lipid soluble. Examples include oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide. Oxygen is delivered to the interior of the cell, almost as if the cell membrane did not exist. The second pathway is through protein channels. Ions diffuse across the membrane via the integral proteins. These channels are classified into three types: ligand-gated channels, voltage-gated channels, and mechanically gated channels. The type of ion channel is determined by the process that will change their conformation. A ligand-gated channel opens when a specific molecule binds to it. A voltage-gated channel opens when there is a change in membrane potential. The opening of a mechanically gated channel is associated with a physical deformation of the membrane. An important example of this transport mechanism is the passage of water molecules through aquaporins. Water is highly insoluble in the lipid layer of the membrane. It readily penetrates the cell membrane, with virtually all of it passing through the protein channel. Other lipid-insoluble molecules diffuse through protein channels into the cell membrane if they are sufficiently small. In a process known as facilitated diffusion, a special carrier protein with a central channel acts as a selective corridor which helps molecules move across the membrane. These special carrier molecules that form the protein channel bind only to a specific molecule, such as a particular sugar or amino acid. Once the molecule binds to the carrier protein, this protein helps or facilitates the diffusion process by changing its shape and moving the molecule down its concentration gradient through the membrane into the cell, where it is released. Facilitated diffusion is similar to simple diffusion in that both involve the movement of molecules down their concentration gradient. This pathway does not require ATP. However, in facilitated diffusion, the movement of molecules will only take place if it is aided by a special protein carrier in the membrane. Facilitated diffusion can occur in either direction depending on the concentration gradient. If there is a higher concentration of the particular molecule inside the cell, this same carrier protein will then transport the molecule out of the cell. This mechanism is important in glucose transport, where the carrier moves glucose down its concentration gradient from the extracellular fluid to the cytoplasm of the cell. Insulin also increases the entry of glucose into cells by increasing the number of glucose transporters in the cell membrane. At times, a large concentration of a substance is required in the intracellular fluid, even though the extracellular fluid contains only a minute concentration. Conversely, it is important to keep the concentrations of other ions very low inside the cell, even though their concentrations in the extracellular fluid is great. For example, some energy source is required to move potassium and sodium ions against their concentration gradients. Active transport occurs when a cell membrane moves molecules or ions against its concentration gradient. This mechanism has two types and is classified into primary or secondary active transport. The primary active transport mechanism that has been studied in the greatest detail is the sodium-potassium pump. This transport process moves sodium ions outward through the cell membrane